I was just like, this isn't a hobby. We have to shift society dramatically for change. This isn't going to be done if everyone just treats the world as a hobby.
Podcast Junkies, episode 217. Welcome back. First off, top of mind for everyone is what's going on with COVID and safety and self-quarantine and social distancing and new terms that we never had a use for or known about as of maybe a month ago or 6 months ago. But wow, how dramatically things have changed over the past week, even just in between episodes. I was still at PodFest as of like 10 days ago, I think it was, less than 2 weeks. And so just to think about even being in a crowd of like 2,000 people is so crazy what the new normal is. So I hope you all listening are okay and safe. And obviously all podcasters are thinking about what they should be doing in terms of content. Also, in case you hear music in the background, it's playing in the living room, and I was about to turn it off, and I'm like, it's a new way of doing things right now, and everyone's chilling and relaxing. So there's some music in the background if you hear that for Sunday. Anyways, yeah, I hope everyone that's listening is safe and healthy, and that your loved ones and family are safe and healthy. And we're all trying to do what we can do to get us through what is going to be, at the very least, another month of this, maybe 3, maybe 6, like we don't even know. And that's what's interesting. And so I thought the best thing was to just come on here, continue to record and put out episodes as a way to honor the conversations I've had already that I recorded before, and a couple more that I'm looking to record coming up. So I think we do need to tell stories and get people more engaged with podcasting, and that's our superpower as podcasters, for those of you that are. And I hope you keep on doing it, and just obviously add some context so that you're not appearing tone deaf or immune to everything that's happening out there. I think that's the best course of action. This episode is brought to you by Focusrite. There's a fantastic sponsorship happening this month. Focusrite has launched the Podcast Studio Makeover, and it's running from March 6th through April 17th. This is an amazing giveaway, and you should definitely jump on this. They've partnered with a group of companies to give away 3 prize bundles to chosen winners, each of them valued at over $2,300. This bundle is bananas. First off, it's the Scarlett 18i8 third generation USB audio interface. It features 4 upgraded third generation Scarlett mic preamps, the switchable air mode I've mentioned earlier, 2 high headroom instrument inputs, 8 line inputs. This thing is amazing. Then there's the Heil PR40 and PL2T boom arm, a free month of Squadcast. You guys know I love Squadcast, plus 50% off the first 2 months. Simplecast, again, another fantastic partner of the show. You get the first month free. Audio Mute, you get a $500 store credit and a free consultation. Hindenburg, a $95 store credit, enough for a journalist to be applied towards an upgrade. And Adam Audio is providing a pair of SP5 headphones. Last but not least, you get to pack it all up in your Namba gear, Lil Namba Remix backpack. This is a crazy, crazy, crazy kit. Make sure you sign up. I've created a special link. Go to podcastjunkies.com/Focusrite promo. That's podcastjunkies.com/Focusrite promo. What are you waiting for? Go sign up now. So last episode, I spoke to the one and only James Cridland, host of Pod News and the editor of Pod News. It's one of the most widely read newsletters for the podcasting industry, and he gave a great overview of his radio and podcasting background, how he started the podcast, and where things are headed to now. And this was I think right before I was about to head to PodFest. So I think there was still some early talk about coronavirus, but it's how much has changed since that conversation. This week I speak to Taz Ahmed, one of the co-hosts of Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, and a shout out to Jay Connor, who we mentioned, for introducing us. It's interesting because what you'll notice is that this is towards the end of the episode, Taz talks about how they're winding down the show, which is something interesting because we always think about people podcasting forever, and it's funny how they had that planned at the moment that they decided that was going to happen. So I appreciate coming on, talking about the state of the election process in this and getting out the vote for underrepresented communities, and we had a nice discussion about that as well. So all in all, just a really well-rounded conversation with Taz, and I'm really glad we connected, and you get to hear her story. Let's not forget that this episode is also brought to you by FullCast. FullCast.co is the website. If you need help with any aspect of your show, from launch to production and marketing, we can help. Schedule a free chat at fullcast.co/chat15 about your existing or new show. Make sure you stay to the end of the episode where I reveal this week's retention hashtag. But let's get to conversing with Taz. So, Taz Ahmed, co-host of Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. Thank you for joining us on Podcast Junkies.
Thanks for having me.
So I was excited to chat because we have a mutual friend, Jay Connor.
Yeah. He's my neighbor.
Is he? How close do you guys? How close are you guys?
He's like across the street from me. It's kind of weird.
We should have had him pop in.
I know. He easily can.
So for the benefit of the listener, I usually like origin stories to begin with. So let's start with Jay, since it's the common thread here. How did you guys connect?
Jay and I met, I think, at the USC. We met at a podcast festival, actually. But I think we really connected at the USC did a podcast festival, podcasting day, like a year ago. It's been kind of wild because I've been podcasting as long as you have. It's been about 5 years now. And I just feel that there's like so many more places to connect with other podcasters than there were back when I started doing podcasting. And it's been really fun to be a part of this community.
Have you been part of other communities, and have you noticed a difference? Because that's one of the first things people say, like people that come in from like business communities or photography communities, or it's like when they meet the podcasting community, they really get a taste of how accommodating and supportive like everyone in the podcasting community is. Like we all want each other to succeed. What's your experience been so far?
You know what I've been telling people? I've been saying that like podcasting is the new version of blogging. I used to blog for many, many years. I was a blogger on Sepia Mutiny, which was the largest South Asian American blog for a while. And I felt like in that community, everyone had their own blog. Everyone was just like writing about themselves and writing about common experiences. And I feel like that's what podcasting is now. Everyone who used to have a blog now has a podcast. And I mean, it's kind of silly, but also it's very supportive and kind of fun.
So talk a little bit about your entry and your relationship with your co-host, Zara Norbash, and what was the inspiration for starting your show?
Our show started because Zara and I were both living in Oakland, and we were in this book called Love Inshallah. We're both essay writers. And we'd go on these book tours, and then that's how we like got to know each other. We'd go on these book tours, and then we'd joke around, and we'd have a lot of fun. And then we were like, oh, this should be a podcast. And this was back when no one had podcasts, right? The book came out in 2012. So podcast, we would just like make fun of podcasts. And it turned into kind of like a gag where on Twitter, we would tweet at each other, and then we'd use the hashtag GoodMuslimBadMuslim and just make fun of the fact that like, next time on the Good Muslim Bad Muslim podcast, we're going to talk about the burqa bikinis, just super facetious, super sarcastic. And our followers were just like, I tried to look for this podcast. I couldn't find it. And we were just totally making fun of it. This isn't like real. This isn't. And then Zara's a stand-up comedian. And she's like, everyone who's a stand-up comedian has a podcast. So I need a podcast. I was like, I don't want to learn another skill. I have a lot of skill sets. There's a lot of tech involved. I don't want to pick this up. So I kind of like hem and hawed for like about a year. And then I was working at an organization where our communications person was just like, I think you should start a podcast. And I was just like, I don't want to learn how to like cut tape. And he's like, I'll do it for you. So he volunteered his services to be the sound engineer. We were his first podcast. And now he left the job to go into the world of radio and has his own podcast now. Like it was a starting point for all three of us. And I feel like we just all really blossomed out of this experience.
What were some of the challenges early on, either with coordinating your schedules or gear or any of that sort of stuff?
It was definitely like gear because I had no idea how to do any of the gear. So I got a MacBook Pro and we just used GarageBand. I borrowed a Blue mic for the first 3 years of the podcast.
Huh.
And we just like recorded it on Blue mics. Now we have like a studio in LA and a fancier setup, but like people are always like, why don't you have guests on the podcast? Literally the only reason why we don't have guests is because we couldn't figure out how to set up a third mic. Like it was just a 2 mic situation. We could not figure out how to do one more. And we're like, this is it. This is why we're going to do this. And then it kind of like worked for us. Like we did a couple of guests sometimes, but we just really preferred the conversations we had with each other. It got a little bit too hectic otherwise.
Did you have a format in mind, or did you just were you thinking that you both were just going to riff and see what came out of it?
I'm not a riffer. Zara's the comedian. I'm a political activist, organizer. I don't do well with riffing. So I was the one that was like, we need an agenda. And she was just like, let's just talk. I was like, no. Like, if we just talk, I'm not going to get a say in anything. So we have like a top 3 hot topics. So we do hot topics at the top of the hour. And then we wanted it only to be half an hour, but it keeps getting pushed into 45 minutes. And then the second half is a bunch of short segments. So we declare fatwas, we do creeping sharias, we do awkward asking Muslims. We give out Good Muslim awards. We just have like a lot of like quick segments. And that's been a lot of fun.
Was there anything else on this topic, or just coming at it from the angle that you guys were when you launched?
No, we were the only ones. I don't like saying that because I feel like there's so many other like Muslim podcasts out there, but literally we were the only ones because it was 2014.
Yeah,
and no one was podcasting back then.
What's interesting is that you said you had an engaged following on Twitter. So did they immediately like flock to the show once they heard that you actually did have a podcast?
Yeah. We were able to. It's funny because I had a background in doing PR, so people are like, "Oh, you blew up so fast," but there's a lot of work, behind the scene work that went into it. Because what I did was I took our logo and then I blasted it on all the Muslimish groups, on all the spaces, all 9 spaces.
Yeah. And
we were on PRI doing our first interview before the release of our first episode.
Wow.
So we were able to launch really with a really big audience from the get-go. Like that's like a little bit behind the scene because it really does seem like we just kind of came out of nowhere and like hit the ground running, but there was a lot of like prep work behind that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what they say about luck. That's really when preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that like when I talk to people coming up in podcasts, I will not tell them to do what we did. Like I think everyone should just start a podcast, and because it's very easy and accessible. But I think at the time, because Zara and I had like a big following already, we couldn't put out a shitty product. We like actually had to put out we had to go in really tight.
Yeah.
But that's not the advice I give to people. I think my advice to people is like, just do something, just put something out there. Cause like, don't wait. Like every project ends and you can like start another one.
Yeah. Especially with podcasters. Most podcasters sit on their first episode. Most podcasters hate the sound of their voice.
Yeah. Yeah. Just put it out there.
Have you inspired other folks to start a podcast?
I mean, I'm sure we have. I don't want to be that magnanimous and say that we started a movement, but yeah, there's like a lot of we're friends with a lot of Muslim podcasts. We're friends with a lot of brown podcasts. I'm a big fan of Call Your Girlfriend.
Okay.
And I love their shine theory behind their podcast, their philosophy of like, shining light on other people, other women who don't usually get shine. So there's definitely, we do a lot of sharing of spotlight, basically.
You make it a point on the show in a description to clarify the distinction between what people consider a good Muslim and a bad Muslim. So what's been the response from the traditional Muslim community to the show?
The traditional Muslim community? At first there was like a lot of haters from inside the community. They were just like they just didn't like us. They didn't like us because no one, and I don't want to just say this about Muslims, but just generally in society, people don't like hearing women And so like the fact that like we were two women speaking, we were two women of color that were just speaking about our lives, like how dare we?
Yeah.
And how, how dare we not like fall under like what patriarchy is telling us to do. So I mean, like, so I don't want to say that's like a Muslim community thing.
Yeah.
I think it's just like people don't like hearing women's voices and women's opinions.
When did you start to realize that the show was getting some visibility? Because I mean, if in May of 2016 you were invited to speak or record or promote the show from the White House, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, we recorded at the White House. I got an award from the Obama White House. So when I got the award, we made recording at the White House a thing. We were getting visibility from the get-go.
Yeah.
Like we were on PRI before the first episode. So we were in like Cosmopolitan, we were in Oprah magazine, we were in Wired. Like all of the publicity we got was probably in our first 3 years. Now we're too old. Like we've been around too long. Yeah. Everyone only cares about the new or younger podcasts.
And do you have a lot of folks or younger people now asking you like how to start a podcast now because of the success that you guys have had?
Yeah. I mean, people ask us, but like the field has changed so dramatically. Like our advice is obsolete.
Yeah.
It's so weird, because like we started on, a MacBook and we just like posted through Squarespace, but now there's so many other tools out there that you don't even need that. Like, and it's funny because like when at the USC event, like these students are going in communication school, they're taking classes on podcasting, they're taking classes on how to like write narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get any of that formal training. All of our training was like on the fly. So it was just one of those things where you're just like, we have success, but like we broke the ceiling so that you could have the resources you have. Don't do what we did. Like use the resources that have been created for you. I have like zero advice.
Just start is basically the best one.
Yeah. Just start. Just do something. There's no real way to do this.
And then in April 2017, you were honored by the city of Los Angeles for an Asian Pacific American Heritage Month as Activist of the Year. That must have been pretty awesome as well.
Yeah, that was cool. That was fun. That was we got an award. Like it was in downtown LA in front of the city hall, and it was like a big like Asian American festival thing.
Yeah.
And I definitely have the award on my wall. It's just like so silly to have this recognition certificate from the city of LA that it's like Los Angeles City and it's on official paper and it just says good Muslim, bad Muslim activism. And you're like, what? Like, how is this like, how is what I do like even able to be recognized in this way?
Talk a little bit about your background before you started podcasting. What where did you go to school for and what were you working in at the time?
I did not go to school for podcasting.
I know that.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
My background is I've been doing electoral engagement for 20 years now.
Okay.
I started when I was, in college. I went to USC down the street here in Los Angeles. I got a degree in environmental studies. I wanted to save trees. I moved to DC and September 11th happened. And as a, brown Muslim woman who participates in, who's just like in the world, like I knew that my life was going to change after 9/11 happened. And I was working at this organization, like getting out the vote for environmental youth. They're all like white hippie kids I was like building up like political power for white hippie kids. And I was like, no one's doing this for South Asian people. No one's doing this for Muslim people. So I quit that job after 2 years and I started a nonprofit called South Asian American Voting Youth to get out the vote for South Asians around the 2004 election cycle. So then I was like, started this nonprofit out of I moved back home. I like used the computer that was in the kitchen. I like started it basically out of my parents' kitchen. I was 24 at the time. And we turned out thousands of voters that year. I just stuck to the field. I got a master's degree in public policy at UCLA, the focus on racial justice. I went on to work at various Asian American organizations over the years and turned out over 500,000 Asian Americans to vote over the course of my career.
Right.
And it's been a very interesting ride. I think that's professionally what I do, but I think what has come out of that work is that my understanding of civic empowerment and civic engagement is really like, you can't just say, go vote. You need to like tie it to culture. You need to tie it to what's happening in pop news. You need to tie it to narratives. And that's really why I got involved in storytelling and in writing on blogs. And, I'm an essayist. All my essays, writing, podcasting is all connected to how do we tell the stories of our community to empower our community and to get them civically engaged. And then like voting is like not just about voting. Voting is about building community power. So it's like if we can get people registered to vote and we can tell their stories and we can make people like feel safe to tell their stories and express themselves, then they'll be empowered. And I think that's what I'm trying to do at the end of the day, whether it's podcasting, making art, making cards, whatever it is, it's like, how do we get community to feel good about themselves?
Is this something that you were taught, or is this something you like observed or influenced by from your parents? Because to pick those types of majors and to go into that field of study, I'm curious, like where that influence came from.
I don't know. My parents wanted me to be a doctor. They didn't want me to like be an activist. Are you kidding me? They wanted me to make like money. They're like, I remember my dad's like, so how come you don't have like a brand new car? Like that was like, he just wants like status symbols. So like this whole like, like they didn't like put that on me, but like my parents were blue collar workers. My sister like has asthma because we live by the freeway growing up. So like these public policy issues, like I saw how it affected my family. And I was like, for people like my family, I can't not fight for them. So even if my like parents didn't understand why I was pursuing this career, like I still like I was doing it for them, even though they didn't understand that I was doing it for them. Maybe like now there's a little bit more of understanding what I do, but I definitely when I started, definitely in my 20s, they were just like really like not down for it. They just wanted me to get married and become a doctor.
Yeah, I'm Hispanic. I was born in El Salvador, and so like the same kind of thing, like the culturally, like they want you in a suit, wearing like if you've got a 9-to-5 job and you're wearing a suit, or you've got like a respectable job, then you've made it officially.
Right.
So.
Yeah, like it was fine for them. It was like that's a good hobby, but like I was just like, this isn't a hobby. We have to shift society dramatically for change. This isn't going to be done if everyone just treats the world as a hobby.
What's interesting about what you're doing is that a lot of times people feel like, oh, I'm just one person. Like, how much difference can I make? And is that something that was not even a thought for you early on? You just realized that if you put enough passion into it, that you were going to be able to make a difference?
I mean, I think when I was doing environmental organizing, I definitely felt like I'm just one person. There's nothing I can do. But then when I shifted into doing South Asian and Muslim organizing, I could literally count the people. At the time, I could count who was doing things, and I got really obsessed with just figuring out who was in the movement. Then it really is like no one else is doing it. And if I don't do it, then no one else is going to do it. I still feel a lot of that. People are telling me not to feel that, but I still do feel that a lot.
When you had these conversations early on with people about the importance of voting, obviously there's a demographic there that doesn't think that it's important. Like again, this idea of like one vote, what's my vote going to do?
Yeah.
So what were some of the either the pushback or the conversations you were having with people early on when you were hitting the streets and talking to people about the importance of their vote?
Oh gosh, I mean, all kinds of pushback. I think one of the things that I really focus my work on is that creating culturally competent materials and creating like materials that speak to people. So one of the first things that I did was I made a sticker, and then the sticker said, "I'm South Asian and I vote." I mean, stickers were like what we did in the early 2000s. That was a tactic that we used. Kids these days are all about memes, but like stickers were like really big back then. Stickers
were the original memes.
Yeah, seriously. Like you would just hand them out. And so like I would hand these stickers out, and people would see these stickers and they'd say like, "Oh, no one ever told me that I was a voter, and that like being South Asian could be connected to voting." Like what I was trying to do was just shift people's political consciousness to see themselves as political beings, not just brown people, I guess. And it was just kind of fun just to see like yourself on a sticker in that kind of a way. And since then I've become more sophisticated in what I do outside of stickers. But it's always been about like, how do we, this community isn't apathetic. It's just being ignored from the political process. Studies show that Asian Americans are 30% not assigned to a political party. And I feel like a big part of that is just because like political parties don't know how to talk to Asian Americans, which means their votes are up to be catched. And the reason why they're not being catched is they're not being spoken to in their languages. They're not being given material that looks like them. They're not being spoken to at the Asian grocery store where they're shopping at. So like all these things are just like unique to our different communities. So that's kind of been the approach to all the voter work that I've been doing, is just like, how do we shape this message so that our communities are being talked to like humans and that we are being talked to at their level. That being said, like I still get pushback from people that are just like, I don't want to vote because it doesn't matter. Now it's like a little bit harder. Now I'm like less excited to convince people because I feel like there's so much out there.
Yeah.
We have Trump as president. We have like so many like people of color running for office. It's just one of those things where you're just like if you're not like opening up your eyes in this day and age to like what's happening around you, I really don't know how to convince you to go vote.
Do you think that the wave we had in some of the recent elections of more women and even Muslims being elected to office, did that help what you were doing and give people something to point to and say, look, it is making a difference. Look what's happening? Yeah.
I mean, I think when Obama got elected, that was a really big deal. I think one of the interesting things that happened when in that campaign cycle, in the 2008 campaign cycle, was that whenever you would talk to anyone, they would say like, oh, Obama's just like me because he has a Muslim father, or he like grew up in Chicago, or he was an organist. Like, it was just funny, like how Obama's life was so latch-onable that no matter what race or ethnicity you were in America, there was some part of his narrative that you could be like, oh, he's just like me.
Yeah.
Which was really cool.
African-American.
Yeah. No matter what. No matter what it was, everyone's just like,
pot smokers.
Yeah. There was always something where like when you talk to someone, they're like, oh, he's just like me. And you're just like, that's very interesting. And I think after Obama got elected, there was like this huge wave of like young people of color who had no experience that were running for office, which I also have some issues with, because I feel like you need to have at least some like community involvement before you start running on behalf of a community. But there was like this huge wave of like people running for office. And then like everyone kind of got like numb because things were so good with Obama and they like were stopped fighting. And now Trump's in office. And then all of a sudden, like you have all these women of color that ran for office, which is great. There is definitely like a fire under everyone's ass to be activated and organize, which is awesome. But this is going to be a tough election cycle for sure.
How has the work that you do changed since you said you started in 2004 and you're still doing that same type of work now?
Yeah. I now work at an organization for my day job where we do digital organizing for the Asian American community. So I've always been doing work in the Asian American community. What's changed over the years? I think it's just really interesting to see how people grow. I don't know, like there's always like a new generation of people that never understood what happened before. So like when I organize now, when you organize young people, like if you organize someone who's like 21, they were like born in September 11th. So like the narrative around like post 9/11 backlash, that doesn't really resonate with them. So it's really interesting just to see like this is an era of people who grew up with the Patriot Act. They don't understand what it's like not to have the Patriot Act. And it's a society of people who think surveillance is okay.
Wow.
And so just like those things are just like really interesting because you're just like, oh, like you literally don't know what it's like to not have that. And then the tactics are obviously different. Like the internet was not around really when we started this work. When I started Savvy, I had to get a webmaster. It was such a big deal to create a website. Like scanning an image was hard, figuring that out. Now, like I was able to do all of that on my own for Good Muslim, Bad Muslim on Squarespace. It was easy. I did it in 2 hours. Like that work was like,
Yeah.
it was, I don't understand. I don't know how to tell people how hard it was to do things on the internet before.
You kids don't know, right?
You don't know. It's so easy. Now you just take pictures and post it immediately off your phone on a feed. You can do like all this stuff is just like the technology is just making it so much more accessible. That was like so auntie of me to like frame everything like that.
Well, it's funny because it's there's I think like a page or a website like if you were born after this date, and it keeps changing like every year, then they start rattling off a bunch of things that you wouldn't even know about, like you don't know what Atari was or Facebook was or whatever it is, depending on it. So like things that we take for granted, like people like to your point, like even people born after 9/11, like have no frame of reference for that.
None. Modems. We had modems. We couldn't just connect to the internet. We needed to wait for the phone line to click. And then like if someone picked up the phone on the other end, then it would cut off your connection. You'd lose your work.
I might have to splice in find a loop or a sample of one of that modem sounds.
Yeah.
Because just so people know exactly what we're talking about, because you would just have to sit there waiting for that to connect.
It was so annoying.
And images would load. It would be like one bar.
Yeah, one bar at a time. You're just like, what is happening? No text messaging?
No.
Nope.
Speaking of text messaging and new technologies, I was briefly supporting Marianne Williamson in this last round, and just working with the campaign. And she recently dropped out, but it was interesting to see what some of the new tactics that were being used for campaigning. There was a tool called ResistBot. It's like an SMS service, and you could send. I don't know if you've used it before, but it's interesting. Like, do you find that the types of tools that are available now make engagement and I think there's a website where you can immediately like text the response and it'll send a form letter to your senator or something like that. So there's a lot of great services that make connecting with our representatives much, much easier.
Yeah, it's really fun, actually. That's what my organization, 18 Million Rising, we do petitions. So we have like, we do petitions to corporations. We also do it to people elected in office. We have a call tool to make it easier for members to call our congressperson. I'm really interested in, we've dabbled in text messaging. We haven't like jumped fully into it. I think text messaging is where we're moving. I have spent the bulk of my career doing phone banks. So we'd call people, we'd have a phone room and then people would just call. But no one's picking up phones anymore. So that's one of the biggest issues with doing these phone banks. So we have to get creative talking to people, because if they're not answering the phone, then we have to text message them. But there's all these laws that are preventing us from just blanket text messaging people. So we need people are being creative. So I think the creative part has been really interesting. I don't know what other technology is out there, but I think like every 2 years there's like something new and you're just like, okay, is this going to work? Let's see. And it's kind of fun, I guess. Like, it's like the market is constantly shifting. So you have to shift with that and see what people are using. What I'm interested in is that when it comes to the Asian American community, they're more likely to use like tools like WhatsApp or Viber. Like the Chinese community has a version of WhatsApp that's just for their community. And so I'm really curious how we can start sending like get out the vote messages in language through these apps, which I don't think anyone's really thinking about. In these communities, they're just in these like really weird groups in family chains and whatever in WhatsApp. And you're like, that's how people are communicating. So how do we get in there with our tactics?
How about folks that are, or a younger generation that's actually coming in and volunteering or choosing this type of work as a career? Do you consistently see people still interested in helping with get out the vote initiatives and supporting these types of underserved communities?
I think yes and no. I think there's always going to be an interest in political engagement. I think having someone like AOC winning, she's only 29, right? Like, she's a youth herself. I think like young people seeing that they can have that kind of a difference is definitely people are still feeling engaged and empowered. But I would say that a lot of the nonprofits that are doing this work are just not getting funded through foundations, which is just the unfortunate thing of being in the nonprofit world.
And do you see it really driven by who's in office at the time? I mean, is that what motivates people?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there is, but I think also it's also like where you're at in the U.S., like how accessible is like local politics too. I mean, like I'm in LA and like people in LA, like our state assembly members in California will work for the state in Sacramento, then they'll come and work for city council, which is not the route that you take in other states. Other states, you work for city council, then you go to state assembly. Because LA is so big, like, and we have so like it's kind of like a celebrated status to be on city council in LA County, in LA City. So it's just kind of like my context for political power is just kind of skewed. We have like 4 million people in the city of Los Angeles, so which is like, bigger than some states in this country. So my idea of power is a little bit different.
Have you ever had aspirations yourself for running?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I picked USC and UCLA because I was like, okay, these are like local colleges. So it'll give me, people will see me and they'll know that like I'm a local person. And then I was a campaign manager for my friend. I moved to Oakland. She ran for Oakland City Council. She was like a Korean American woman. She was 27 at the time. I think I was like 31 at the time as her campaign manager. It was a small race. We were trying to like turn out, I think we had to like, to win, we had to like turn out like 5,000 voters. It was like a 12,000 voter district or something. And it was so hard. She had to be so nice all the time. Like people would be rude to her and she would just have to be nice. And I'm not a nice person, I guess. I thought I was until I had to do this. Someone walked into the campaign office. They said something super Islamophobic. It was, and I didn't know how to respond to that. I think I responded rudely is what happened. And in that moment, I was just like, I could never run for office. I could never have my personal life be skewered like this because that's what ends up happening. And
yeah.
I've said too many terrible things on the internet. And it will come back to haunt me. Now I know I can't run for office. Like the things I've said on Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. I think that's also kind of why I went like so vocal is like after I decided I'm never running for office, then I was just like, oh, I guess I can have a podcast now. I guess I can, be very public with my essays and be very vulnerable. I mean, you were like working for Marianne Williamson, right? Like, I feel like she's very
just volunteering, yeah.
But she's like very vulnerable and stuff. I mean, she made it pretty far.
Yeah, and she was getting roasted as well. Like, I mean, the stuff that they were saying just in Twitter and stuff, it was just like, wow. Like, I mean, all she's talking about is like positive, high vibe stuff,
right?
They're painting her like a crystal fairy, like,
yeah. The internet is mean.
Yeah. You definitely have to have thick skin, and I think obviously you mentioned AOC, like what you've seen, like the heat that she's taken has been pretty crazy.
So much heat
as well. Yeah,
it's wild. I think there are some people that can. I think I'm just better as a campaign manager. I would rather just take that seat versus like being in the public like that. I'm okay being in the public like this, but like I'm not trying to, win votes.
Do you think it's more challenging now because of the visibility? And you mentioned like thinking about early on. I remember like a girl I dated a long time ago. She had aspirations. This is back in like late night, I think mid 90s or something like that. So I'm definitely dating myself. But she had aspirations to, I think, run for office in the future. She really knew that she wanted to, so she wouldn't let like people take pictures of her.
Right.
So this is back with like regular cameras, but now between like people, there's stories of people like not getting jobs because of like companies checking out Facebook histories and stuff like that. It's almost virtually impossible to not be under public scrutiny from the moment you come online.
Absolutely. And like as a Muslim, we're hyper surveilled, right? Like NSA is always watching us. So like in some ways there's no escaping it, but at the same time, I don't know. We can't just like give up our privacy so easily. We have to like fight for at least a little bit of our freedom.
Yeah. What keeps you going and to keep doing the work you're doing? Because you've been doing it for such a long time. So I know there's moments where you might get discouraged, but what is it that keeps you working on this as your passion?
I don't know. I'm going through a period of discouragement right now. It's definitely having friends around that like tell you that like you're doing good definitely helps. I mean, I'm really sad that we're going to be ending our podcast. We've had a 5-year run. We're recording our last episode in February, actually in 2 weeks. It's going to be done. And I'm like both relieved, but like it definitely fueled me for these past 5 years. Like being able to experience a microaggression and then like go on the podcast and talk about it with Zara was really great. So it like that part was really cool to be to have like an outlet where I could like vent and talk about different issues that were upsetting me, which is, yeah, I mean, that's what our podcast was. Like anytime there was something happening in society, there's a hate crime, there was, from something as light as a burqa bikini to something as dark as Muslims getting murdered, we would always cover it. And but having that outlet like definitely helped fuel me wanting to do this work. And, like comments and letters from our readers for all the things that I do was super helpful. To know that you're like making change in someone's life always kind of keeps you going.
When did you and Zara start to talk about the show having like an end, and that you were going to wrap it up after 5 years?
We started doing it this year. Yeah. We gave ourselves a 1-year runway, which is like the length of a lot of regular podcasts. Like podcasts have like a lifetime of like 6 months, they say.
Yeah.
We never took a break. We've been consistent as a monthly podcast, which is also like most podcasts will do seasons and they'll take a break and then they'll come back.
Yeah.
But we haven't like stopped once. We did like a rerun episode when I got into a car accident the day like I was driving to the studio. And then I was just like, I can't speak on this. But that was like, and then we did like, I think that was it. That was our only rerun episode.
Do you remember like when was the moment where, because up to year 3 or something, you guys are churning out episodes month after month. What was the conversation? Do you remember the conversation when you and Zara said, "Hey, I think we need to think about when we might want to wrap this up"? It's helpful because a lot of podcasters listen too, because everyone thinks like, "Oh, I started a show, so it's now indefinite. I've got to do it forever." Like, and it's not. Some people do, like you said, short seasons, and then and like everything else, everything has a life cycle, right?
Yeah, I think we definitely had like a really huge like make or break moment at month 6 of the podcast. It was just taking a toll on both of us. So we recentered and we were like, okay, what are we trying to get out of this podcast? She, as a comedian, was trying to get audience for her comedy. I, as an activist, was trying to, and a writer, like I was trying to, like, we both wanted to get book deals. I was trying to get like attention for my activism. And she wanted to get attention for her comedy too. So because of that, we actually didn't create social media for Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. We only have the website. We were trying to traffic people to both of our individual sites, which was, I think, very smart of us to do that, because now that we're ending the podcast, we're still able to keep our followers on our own personals.
Which I'm sure you built up over the course of the...
Yeah. And we're not losing it. I've been a part of a lot of projects where we created social media assets, and then once the project ended, we lost all of the assets.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Because it was gone. And then like once we had that like mission that we were like gonna do this for ourselves, we were like, that was kind of what was guiding me. It was just like, okay, we're gonna keep doing this for as long as we're able to fulfill those missions. We created an LLC in year 3. We were really trying not to create an LLC for a long time because we didn't want that, but to get a check from Audio Boom, who does our ads for us.
Oh yeah.
They needed like an LLC, so we had to create one. And then, gosh, I don't even remember what happened. And it was like January of like 2018, and I for sure was the one that was just like, I'm really tired. I don't want to do this anymore. And then it took Zara a little while to get on board. She decided after I did. And I think one of the great things about, I've been a part of so many projects that just kind of like fizzle out. And I didn't want this to fizzle out. I wanted to celebrate the end of our product. And I think what I love about our decision to end was that, and for the last 4 episodes, we used completely different formats than we've used in other projects. So our November episodes, Zara and I produced stories. For our Christmas episode, we both created fiction stories, and we had our friends read it. We cast it, and we just, sound effects and stuff. We're doing a fun live show for our last show. We're going to celebrate it. So that feels really good. Like, it feels good to like end it in this kind of like really special way. And Zara brought up a really great point that like when people listen to your podcast, they're usually going to work backwards. So I was like, yeah, like if we're going to end it here, we better make the last few ones the best.
Yeah.
So that like as people work backwards, they can like, they can hear our best work through the show.
And when you agreed and you were both on the same page about winding it down, is that when you started communicating to your listeners as well?
No, we waited a couple months.
Okay.
We talked to our friends first, and then we announced it in one podcast. But I don't know. I don't know if we've lost a lot of listeners, but we've just been around for so long. Like when we first started and we would talk to people, they're like, "Oh, I listen to every single show," and now the market's just very crowded. So like they're not listening to every single show, even though we're a monthly show. They're not listening to everything. So we did announce it on our podcast, but then I still have a lot of friends that are texting me now saying like, "Oh, you're ending the show." I was like, "We announced it on episode 6 months ago. We've been talking about it for the past 6 months." So that's when you know that the project's done, right? Like when you lose like your biggest fans are like, "Oh, I haven't listened to it in the past 6 months." You're just like, "Okay, well, I'm not ready to create content that's not being listened to."
Well, it's the nature of podcasting and the fact that there's 800,000 shows in Apple Podcasts. It's just there's so much competition for people's attention now, and so much
competition.
Everyone's starting a show.
Everyone wants a new thing.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that Zara and I had been toying with was like a rebranding. Like we could have easily just taken a break, rebranded, found like another producer to kind of produce us and then to go, which we're not opposed to that. It's just like we tried and we just don't want to be DIY anymore. 5 years of being a DIY podcast is way too long.
Yeah.
And it's, the podcasting world, there's so much money in the podcasting world right now. And so many people are like, we were the first Muslim podcast. Yeah. There's all these other Muslim podcasts that are getting paid way more than we are and that are being able to access like so many resources than we are. But that's because they're newer and we're older. And we're not able. So, like all that stuff is just kind of like, I'm not leaving the podcasting world. I would love to start a new podcast. I'm incubating a new one for 18 Million Rising, where we're going to be doing like Asian American stuff. Zara's incubating a new one. Like we're like not leaving.
You're
podcasting
transitioning.
World. Yeah. We're just ending this project and starting new ones. Honestly, like one of the things that I really regret not doing with Good Muslim, Bad Muslim is that because we were so DIY, we could only have the format that we did, which is the girlfriends podcast, as I call them, like where two girls are talking. And I don't listen to those kinds of podcasts. So like, it's just kind of silly to me. I did when I first started listening to podcasts, but at this stage in my podcast listening, I love narrative. I love highly produced podcasts. I love fiction podcasts. I was listening to the Gaslight podcast yesterday, Moonface. Like I love like how the Heart produces their shows. I love like creative, sound.
Yeah, like immersive theater of the mind type stuff.
Yeah. And we as a Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, we didn't have the resources to do that. And our sound engineer didn't have the skill sets. We didn't have the time. We didn't have the, funders. So like, I don't know, like I'm happy, like I'm proud of Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, but I'm excited to move into that other world of like, how do we do radio theater? How do you do immersive like sound? I've never taken a class on that. Like I would love to figure out how you play with sound and like, I love that like the Heart podcast, like does like almost ASMR style podcasting where it's like so quiet and you're just like, okay.
Yeah.
But even then, like I was listening to The Heart, which is now Mermaid Palace, and they were talking about how they transitioned their hosts because they were like super burnt out. And I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, yeah, this is like, I guess when you have something that's been around for so long, like it's not just Good Muslim, Bad Muslim that's burnt out. It's just everyone like is trying to figure out like how to change how they do things and like shift it. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, because listeners' tastes change as well. Because when they first come in, they consume everything they can. Like new podcasters, they listen to every podcast they can get their hands on. But then when they find other like a specific genre that they resonate with, like like the Gimlet produced shows, like the real like audio dramas, serial, that sort of stuff. Like they really kind of get. Then they find out like what specific genre
what they like. Yeah,
exactly.
Like all the crime podcasts. Like I had no idea crime podcasts were so big, and now like it's huge.
I still don't get it. Yeah. I mean the amount of them and that there's so many is just what's just bananas.
It's bizarre.
I've listened to a couple and they're kind of depressing too. So I don't know how people can.
I like the crime podcasts that are like produced narratives, but I think the biggest crime podcasts that are out there are like the Girlfriend Style, where it's just like two women talking about crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't understand that at all. Like I don't get it.
Like Criminal, right? I think is the one that does that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're still continuing in the podcasting space because, I mean, to your point, you guys were pioneers for covering a topic that not a lot of people were addressing. So, and I think you've learned a lot along the way in terms of what works, what's not, but also being honest with yourselves about when it's time to hang it up and move in a different direction.
Yeah, and we're definitely we're gonna keep the feed open as most podcasts do. So when we do something new, we'll definitely share it with our listeners.
Like Gimlet, like Gimlet does. They just keep that feed open in case they want people and startup. They just drop new show promos every now and then.
Yeah, we have so many followers. Like it's too valuable to give that one up. Yeah, but we're just ready to try new things.
And it's a good brand too. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere down the line someone expressed an interest in that as well, because there's maybe a new wave of co-hosts could come in and refresh the show, and it's still kind of you own the brand.
Yeah, possibly. Maybe,
that'd be interesting.
We do have it as a business.
Yeah. So put the call out there for talent, because you've got new people coming up and like these digital natives and millennials who just want to get involved and just say, hey, it's season. I don't know if you did seasons before, but this could be season 2, where it's just like a whole new, fresh set of hosts.
Right?
And see what happens.
Everyone wants to start their own thing, though. No one wants to jump on someone else's product. Yeah. We're in an era where everyone's like trying to like be their own, which isn't bad. It's just I think it'll be tough. But we're gonna keep it open. So who knows?
Yeah. A couple questions as we wrap up. What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Oh, interesting. I don't know. I'm going back and forth on the power of voting. I think that might be a big one, just because we were just talking about elections.
That's a big one, yeah.
It was a big one considering I spent 20-year career doing electoral engagement. I'm going back and forth on like, I don't know if I'm going back and forth on the power of voting, but I'm just definitely going back and forth on how powerful voting is right now.
Interesting. What's the most misunderstood thing about you?
What I went to immediately is that people always ask us like, who's the good Muslim and who's the bad Muslim when it comes to the podcast. And I'm so annoyed by that question. And I feel like that's the most misunderstood thing about me, is that this idea that like we exist in this dichotomy of good and bad. And the whole point of us calling it Good Muslim, Bad Muslim was so that we could talk about the gray zone of being both, and how like depending on where you are in society, you're considered good or bad. So I would say, despite having 5 years working on this show talking about what is both good and bad, that people still have that perception is kind of annoying.
Well, Taz, I want to thank you for taking some time out to come on the show. I'm glad Jay connected us. I'm glad we got to tell the story. It's fascinating to hear how early on you were recording and publishing on a topic where you're basically first movers in there. So I applaud you for like all the work you've done for the community.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a wild roller coaster, so I'm looking forward to having a little break before jumping into the next big thing.
So, where's the best place for folks to listen to the show? And obviously, since the feed's going to be open, they'll be able to stay updated with what's happening next
Yeah.
with you.
Good Muslim, bad Muslim. Sometimes you need the hashtag. Hashtag good Muslim, bad Muslim.
Okay.
Sometimes you don't need the hashtag. We're goodmuslimbadmuslim.com where you can follow our stuff. And for myself, you can visit tazzystar.me, which is my website. So I sometimes update it. And then at tazzystar on all of the socials.
And we'll make sure we have all those links in the show notes as well to make it easy for folks to connect with you guys.
Yeah, do listen to our last episode.
Yeah.
It should be a lot of fun. We have some surprises.
Yeah, and send me a note when it's ready because I'll promote it as well to my audience. For folks and it might be a first time listen for some folks, but it's definitely entertaining for this for the episodes that I listen to as well. So I definitely invite the listener to check it out.
Work backwards.
Well, thanks again, and best of luck in your future projects as well. So thanks to Taz for showing up on the podcast and telling us the story of Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. And like I mentioned, it's so much fun to hear podcasting folks who were doing it early because there was challenges in everything from gear to equipment to websites that a lot of podcasters now take for granted with something like Anchor.fm. So I'm glad she got to tell that story. And it's been interesting because this is the first time where we actually talk about a show that has an intention of wrapping up, which, some people just want to keep podcasting in perpetuity. But I think the realities of things are that everything has a cycle. And so I like how they were planning it a year away from it so they could figure out how to end gracefully and in style. So that's really nice. So just a reminder, as I did at the top of the show, please stay safe. I think the self-quarantine is a great thing in order to help us get through this as quickly as possible. And I just want you all to stay safe. Intro and outro music composed by Cedar and Soil. Don't forget to support our sponsor, Focusrite, and the new 3G Scarlett 2i2 line, which I personally love. Head on over to podcastjunkies.com/Focusrite promo. They're giving away $2,300 in gear, so don't miss that. Podcast production and marketing provided by FullCast.co. Stay tuned for next week's episode, where I have a great conversation with Danielle Desir. She's founder of the Women of Podcasting group. And it's an amazing story about how, starting from a simple idea and a Twitter group, she grew it into the group that it is now, which is it's great. And we connected at a podcast we connected at She Podcasts. I'm getting all these podcasting conferences confused. And if you made it this far, you're no doubt awaiting the retention hashtag. Let's go with hashtag MuslimTaz, MUSLIM, capital TAZ. And you can tag her at TazzyStar, TAZZYSTAR, and us at podcast_junkies. Take care of yourselves. I love you for supporting the show, and we'll meet again next week.